You get a menu option that lets you change the view.
Good afternoon, everyone. It's great to see you all here. Thank you so much for joining us this afternoon as we present Office and Work Culture. Is it truly inclusive and equitable with Dr. Tierney Bates. My name is Velvet Nelson. I am the director of Launch Chapel Hill, and we're so excited to have you here today and participating in this conversation. Really quickly, I just wanted to introduce Launch to you all if you haven't heard of Launch Chapel Hill before. Launch Chapel Hill is located here on Franklin Street in downtown Chapel Hill. We are a startup and business accelerator that focuses on helping entrepreneurs scale and grow their businesses. And we do that by offering programming and networking events and a community that will strengthen our entrepreneurial ecosystem here, but also teach lessons and offer advice and mentorship to entrepreneurs as they start and grow their businesses. I started as the director here in December 2019, and one of the initiatives that we're focused on is creating an inclusive environment that focuses on the diversity of our entrepreneurs and our network and our community. And one of the ways that we are doing that is by offering programming that focuses on this topic. So this is one of the first in our series. I met Dr. Bates back in March, and we talked about doing this in the spring, and then COVID hit. And so we had to push it down a little bit, but we're really, really excited to have Dr. Bates here this afternoon. So I want to go ahead and introduce you to Dr. Bates and read his bio before he gets started here this afternoon. I am recording the session as well, just so you all know, and I have muted everyone. So please be sure to keep yourself on mute throughout the presentation. Dr. Tierney J. Bates has established himself as a focused leader, speaker, fundraiser, networker, career coach, and voice on equity, diversity, inclusion, and justice. With 20 years in higher education, he has progressed from entry-level to senior-level administration, providing leadership, inclusion, career services, workforce development, recruitment, and fundraising. He is currently at UNC Chapel Hill as Assistant Vice Chancellor for Special Projects and Interim Executive Director, and has served in leadership roles at Virginia Union University, University of Louisville, University of Tennessee, and Bowling Green State University. He is also the founder and chief engagement officer of the Bates Group, LLC, that is a premier boutique consulting and education agency, specializing in working with higher education, corporate industry, and nonprofits. The areas of focus include equity, diversity, inclusion, training and workshops, diverse talent searches, speakers bureau, fundraising consulting for identity-based and diversity fundraising needs. We have worked with companies and organizations on workshops and trainings. Those organizations include Leadership Knoxville, Scripps Network, Target, Enterprise Rentals, North Carolina Department of Administration, the University of Connecticut, Academic Impressions, NACE, and Florida Memorial University. Dr. Bates is from Cleveland, Ohio, and received his Bachelor of Arts in Mass Media Communications with a minor in African American History from the University of Akron, his Master of Arts in Higher Education Administration from the University of Akron, and his MBA from Bryan College, and a doctorate degree from Spalding University. Dr. Bates is a member of Phi Beta Sigma fraternity, the National Association of Student Personnel Administrations, the American College Personnel Association, the National Black MBA Association, Southern Association of College Student Affairs, National Association of Colleges and Employers, 100 Black Men of Triangle East, and a Prince Hall Mason. We are very excited to have you here, Dr. Bates, and I will let you take it from here. I will stop sharing my screen.
Thank you. Hopefully everyone can hear me. Thank you, Velvet, for that great introduction. When somebody ever reads your bio, they don't realize how much stuff you've actually done. I see you have my picture pre-COVID. As you can see right now, I've grown out the beard, the hair, and all other great stuff. But today is a great day, of course, for us to have a great dialogue on truly a topic that has came about over the last few months that to my heart is a passion, but also that's something that's very purposeful for us to really kind of deep dive into and have conversation around as it affects all of us in our daily lives in multiple different ways. Some might not think about it from there, but also from the simple fact that it's important for us to begin the idea of how do we move forward based upon this pandemic we're in, based upon what we've seen with George Floyd, and just the different things that are taking place around our country currently right now. So this topic today is office and work culture. Is it truly inclusive and equitable? And throughout my talk right now, I want you to pull out a paper, some pen, because not only will I talk about certain things, but I'm going to give you solutions as we go through the dialogue and through the talk. I've already given some stuff to Velvet and Keisha to email you guys after this presentation to kind of keep your learning going forward on this. But it's important for you to understand that just in basically peeling back the onion right now of what I'll talk about today. And sometimes afterwards, you have to do more deeper dives within your organization, within yourself, and also within your community as far as that is concerned. So honored to be with you guys today. So what is our discussion today, and why is the reason of this discussion taking place? We know that we've been in this pandemic and COVID has disrupted our lives. As we all know, we've had to work remotely. We've had to face different situations in our home life. All that has just pretty much changed. But it also brought light to the inequities that are taking place also in our society that exist around us. Add on to that, the death of George Floyd back in May set off true issues rising across racial inequities in class, not particularly only in higher education, but in employment, corporations, society as a whole, and the idea that true social justice change must take place as we move forward for organizations and for our society to truly, truly be part of what we want it to be moving forward. As we've also seen, institutions and corporations are implementing what I call performative acts, but not true belonging. And I'll get more into that as we talk a little bit further on, because it was a hot thing to do to say Black Lives Matter, but really, does it matter? And how does that matter in your organization? We also have to understand that in some organizations, we have what we call inequity regimes in the workforce or the office culture that persists. And I'll talk more about and define what inequity regimes are in our talk today. We also have to realize that first time in history that we have 5 generations in the workforce: the silent generation, the baby boomer, Generation X, millennials, and Generation Z is who's coming to your workspace now. And so to give you some context on if you're one of those, if you were born before 1946, you're in the silent generation. If you were born between 1946 and 1965, you're a baby boomer. Gen Xers are 65 to 80. Millennials are born between 80 and 95. And those who were born between 95 and 2010 are now called Generation Z. Those are our college students that are coming to our campuses currently right now. They're mostly all underneath the age of 24 years old. And so that kind of gives you some framework there. The last thing is that obviously, like I said before, the death of George Floyd and the multiple killings of unarmed citizens here in this country has really pushed this whole idea of Black lives do matter. And it also matters to my business people that are on this call. You might not think about it, but at bottom line, it does matter. And I can actually take you through a whole dialogue on why, at the end of the day, diversity, equity, inclusion helps your bottom line. So I want to give you some context about today's talk as well. One of the things you have to understand is that what we're talking about is nothing new. It is just more into the limelight of how people of color, where I will use the terminology Black, Indigenous, people of color have been talking about for years. So I want to give you some history of thinking about this. There's been Fortune 500 companies that have been around for years. Can anyone on this call today, and you can just drop it in the chat, tell me who the first Black CEO of a Fortune 500 company was? And if you don't know the answer, I can give you. It was Clifton Wharton back in 1987 when he became the CEO of TIAA-CREF. What is ironic, Clifton Wharton was also the first African-American or Black to become a president of a predominantly white institution back in 1969 at Michigan State University. But it's funny because in our lifetime, majority of everyone on this call in your lifetime, the first Black CEO was just named in 1987. Fast forward 10 years later, you don't get the next one until Franklin Reigns. Fast forward a couple years later, you don't get the first Black woman CEO until you get Ursula Burns, who was with Xerox. So just in your lifetime, imagine that only in a C-suite level role, you have lived to see the first in those roles for Black people. The first Black scholar, for my higher education people that might be on a call, when I say that, the first person to actually have tenure that was Black was Allison Davis at the University of Chicago, who studied what I'm actually talking about today, the inequities and the social inequities for those people of color, specifically in the South, as far as that's concerned. I know this is Launch Chapel Hill, so we're working with entrepreneurs. We're working with people who have got great business ideas, startups, different things going on. But I always tell people, Black entrepreneurs have been around since we've been in this country. I would argue that if you've never been to Xenia, Ohio, there's actually a Black Entrepreneurs Museum there. Even here at UNC Chapel Hill, we have a new startup organization called Black Entrepreneurs Institute. My dad was a Black entrepreneur. So I can really talk about that even from that perspective as well. So we've always had Black entrepreneurs. What's funny is that we always put the Black on it and not just thinking of them as just entrepreneurs in our society. So let's talk about this performative acts that I mentioned when we first opened up. As we've seen over in higher education, as we've seen in corporation, there were emails and statements that went out within 2 weeks of the death of George Floyd, because everybody who saw that video knew it was wrong. Those emails stated certain things about diversity matters. We want to build a belonging place. We want to feel that everybody is safe. But when we actually truly peel back the onion on that, that is why today's talk is important. Because for many, you would think your culture, you would think your organization is truly an inclusive place. But 9 out of 10, if you've never surveyed your Black, Indigenous, people of color within your organization, they will tell you there's some idiosyncrasies, some microaggressions, and different things within your organization that do not speak to inclusivity. And it's very important that most of the organizations that put out an email or statement during that time frame put it out about diversity. I tell people, you have to stop using the word diversity because it convolutes a lot of different things. The best organization I saw put out a statement was Handshake, which is a national platform that we even use here at UNC. They said, we stand with Black people. They didn't say diversity. They didn't say equity or inclusion. They said Black people. Because at the time of the death of George Floyd, the issue was for Black people, and the issue has been for Black people for 401 years within the United States of America. We've seen other things organizations did by forming committees. I don't know about you guys. I've worked at 5 different institutions. I've been on a committee at every institution I've been at around DEI. And I can go back to my entry level when I first started at Bowling Green State University, and still to this day being at UNC. What does the committee truly do? What kind of true weight do they have to help move an organization forward? Or is it another performative act, or saying what we like to see a lot of times, say we have a committee, but do they have the autonomy, the authority, or the ability to truly interact change? And that's something we see a lot of times within organizations. Money, we've seen organizations give money, and I laugh because I told them they were just giving me my money back. So Starbucks is my example on this. Starbucks went through a couple different things. First, they wanted to put out a statement. People were asking where they're going to put out a statement. They fumbled the ball on it either way it goes. And so organizations need to understand that, hey, you need to have a plan in place for crisis management around these issues. But if you're already doing the work, as I say, you don't have to put out a statement because people know what you're doing. I think what's funny is I tell people, if Starbucks could have helped me, they could have gave me a franchise. I know they don't franchise, but that is what Black people are talking about. So when people were giving $15 million, a prime example was one family gave $40 million to Morehouse and to Spelman College, but they didn't realize there's 107 HBCUs, historically Black colleges and universities, that they could have divvied up a lot of that money to impact the impact what's going to happen to those schools, a lot of them private, with COVID and the retention of their students, as far as that's concerned. We see there's workshops going on, which workshops should continue. This is an ever-evolving dialogue and conversation that must forward. But let's not just put workshops on just to put workshops on. Let's walk away with true, tangible accountability moving forward as far as that is concerned. So what I wanted you to learn today is let's talk about creating belonging. So let's dive right into it. I want you to think about this, and I put it in the chat already, an article I just wrote about dismantling the famous word fit. So fit is a very unique word that we use when it comes to recruiting. Whether you're a startup on here today, a new business, higher education, or just intrigued to learn more about your office and work culture, fit is defined from a Eurocentric ideation. Never was fit in designed with my, looking at me, Tierney Bates, a Black male, involved or ideation of how do I add my own cultural identity into this fit. So a prime example I will use as cultural fit versus cultural add. Based upon most organizations, they look for fit. And when we break down fit, fit can mean whiteness. It doesn't mean that I can show up with this baby afro that I have right now, or this long beard that I'm growing currently right now. But from a Eurocentric ideation, I can show up with dreads. I couldn't show up with certain things. There's a thing called the Crown Act right now that organizations could get behind. It's only passed in 7 states that talks about how we block great talent from coming to our organizations based upon that talent has to fit a certain criteria. I've never had anybody, I've always been said to, I speak articulate. I've been told this before, but I've never heard that being expressed to a white male before. So I understand that in certain scenarios, when I go into it, if I speak a certain way and I act a certain way, more than likely I will fit into what that culture wants. Versus the culture of that organization saying, how do I become a cultural ad? Where I can show up as my authentic self, who I am, what am I by, and add to your organization and add and take your organization to another level versus having to fit and take my salient identity and dumb it down and show up in a workspace then that I don't feel welcome in. And at the same time, we'll turn around and what happens? You can't retain me. There's no one else there like me that I can rely on and have conversations with. And all those things play a fabric in your office in work culture. Fit also has a barrier that we don't think about when it comes to our organizational culture, because our organizational culture can be homogenous and not thinking of what it plays into as far as that's concerned. And I'll give you more examples as I talk about shared language and equity and inclusive leadership. So when I use the word equity and shared language, have you sat down within your organization and looked at all 4 of these words, diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging, and defined each one? And I'm gonna tie this in inclusive leadership, right? Because if you're an inclusive leader, you're really having an idea to think about what is equity in our office, our department, our organization, our office, our company, and then what is the shared language that we have defined, that we will share, that we will hold each other accountable for, that we will market internally, that we know as we onboard new employees and onboard new people to our organization, that they understand what our values are and that it's important. So I'll give you a prime example. So most leaders, and I'm going to combine bullet points, equity, shared language, and inclusive leadership, they have to get beyond the word diversity. I keep saying that because diversity waters things down. If you want to talk about diversity, be significant, be to the point. If you want to talk about Black people, LGBTQ2, if you want to talk about Latinx community, say that. Don't keep throwing everybody into one bucket and then you're not able to move an organization forward because we're playing the number game around diversity versus actually defining what diversity is for us. Example. So example is, if I look at diversity, if we say transgender is diverse, we simply imply that cisgender is the default or the norm, which then basically upholds cisgenderism and heterosexuality. So again, define what diversity is. Define equity. Think about that. Define equity. Black, Indigenous, people of color often have barriers to overcome when accessing resources and opportunities. And all they ever wanted was what that paper said in 1776. And what was promised in 1865 by Andrew Johnson, 40 acres and a mule. Leaders should inspire their team and themselves to use equity-inspired design think that will identify barriers and inequities in their organization. And I'll talk more about inequity design think as far as that's concerned. Define equity. Inclusion, same thing. How do you define inclusion? It doesn't just happen in an organization. It is not the actual consequence of hiring a bunch of diverse people and thinking we're inclusive. That is not the case. It can happen organically, but it's not normally something that happens like that. It has to be designed intentionally. An example of that is a work environment that acknowledges religious and creates a space for prayer or religious difference, all the other stuff. Another example of that is Juneteenth. We all seen that Juneteenth, America found out about it, which is on June 19th. Again, a lot of organizations are now starting to say, hey, we're going to give that as a paid holiday everyone has off. That is an idea that you can think of how do you define inclusion. Belonging, same way. How do you belong to an organization? I always use this analogy. Most folks can come. Diversity is basically being asked to the party. Inclusion is being asked to dance. Belonging is dancing like nobody's paying attention and nobody cares. So it's important for your organization to understand that. As inclusive leaders, you got to also think that What are the tough issues you need to tackle? For the simple fact of, if you're a business owner and you've had to change your business methods, you should have had DEI as a part of your business methods in changing. If you're in higher education and you had to go to remote learning, DEI should have been at the forefront of that, because some of your students cannot afford to do some of the things that you think they need to be able to do to be successful at your institution. And so that is important for you to understand, that you have to think different, and you actually have accountability around it. And you must be viewed through different lenses and ways. Leadership also looks at it as a performance review. I say this all the time, is that if I'm the CEO of the company, I'm your chief diversity officer. Even though I might have a chief diversity officer, I am your chief diversity officer, because from a performance review and evaluations, I'm going to hold my deans, my chancellors, everyone accountable on this topic, and it will be in their performance evaluation. If you're a startup, if you're a business owner, same thing, holding everyone accountable in your organization to move this whole idea of DEI and belonging in your organization is everybody's job. It is not the individual who has it in their job description. I know colleagues that have this in their job description, and I tell them, if they look like me, this should be the last thing they should be working on. I say that for a couple different reasons. It is not the job of the person of color to play the black tax to kind of educate everyone on diversity, equity, inclusion. It is their job to help support and engage, but it's everybody's job, whether you're the executive director, CEO, whatever it may be, to make sure this moves along. And at the same time, you get up to speed and learn what needs to happen within your organization versus putting in all your staff of color. That's what happens. And this is why people don't stay within your organizations, because we're paying the extra black tax that we have to do and carry the water around this topic. Another thing that we have to talk about is intersectionality for employers. I could be LGBT, a woman of color, or a black woman, I'll say, and you think you check the box and good, we got everything in one. That shouldn't be the case. But you should recognize that I am a woman, a black woman at that, and at the same time that I am LGBT, because I bring so many different perspectives from an intersectionality to your workforce. The biggest thing that we lack is really cultural competency around the hiring process. We stick to our values, we stick to our certain things, of course, based upon the job description. But I tell people a lot of different times, as I tie in cultural competency and looking at a resume, I am looking for the intangibles when I go to hire. As somebody who's had to hire multiple people, I look for things outside of the job description, because that is what I want to be able to address, is that person is bringing something else, value added, culturally added to my team. I'll give you a prime example of that, is that one time we were interviewing a staff member and they were good at data analytics. Well, my staff was not good at data analytics, but they want to not hire that person. And I pushed back saying, this person has data analytics on their resume. None of you guys are great at it. I need this person, and I need to add value to our team. And it's important for us to actually take another look at this candidate. Another thing when you look through resumes is looking at the idea of what is on your resume that reflects. If you look at my resume right now, you'll see I have the 100 black men listed. You'll see I belong to the best fraternity on the face of God's green earth. Just all the different things that take place as far as that is concerned. From a cultural competency hiring perspective, I think somebody's muted.
Yes. Okay.
You're muted. Thank you. So again, if those things are on my resume for a cultural competent hiring manager, they will understand that, hey, Tierney might be a black male. Or, of course, we're going to all go Google and LinkedIn each other and find those different things out. But look for inclusionary words, look for inclusionary belonging things that are on a resume as far as that's concerned. You need to leverage DEI like you would your startup or any other business. It should be part of your strategy. It should be objective strategies, goals, and measurements along with it, because it's going to help your bottom line of your organization, and it will also embrace you to help you with your recruitment efforts. Race matters. I know a lot of people get in this whole debate about race, but for more people of Black, Indigenous, and people of color, it does matter. For my white colleagues on the call today, how many times have you had to show up to your job and worry about race? Probably not. But on the flip side, most Black, Indigenous people of color have had to, because they've had to have themselves saliently, identity-wise, trimmed down, slimmed down, or not be able to be their authentic selves when they walk into a workspace. I'll give you a prime example. How many of you guys have potlucks at work? I'm going to give you a little hint right here. Black people don't like potlucks in the work environment. I'll tell you why. And some might giggle on the phone call today and everything like that. Because in our culture, it's always about, we don't know how clean your house is. We don't know what you've made it with. And it's funny because if you ever go to a Black people's picnic, they'll say who made the potato salad, who made the macaroni and cheese, all that other great stuff. It is very particular. So when you talking about an inclusive workspace, you want to make sure that you're obviously having ideations and conversations around that. What are the different things that are taking place in your workspace when you get together for a potluck that is it even inclusive in the menu? Is it inclusive that you understand that some staff won't participate because of it's a potluck and they're like, no, I don't do potlucks because of X, Y, and Z. I don't do buffets, I tell people. So if you go to Ryan's, all those buffet places, Golden Corral, I'll pass. And there's particular reasons why I won't go to those places because I haven't had a good experience at none of them. And so that is the thing that you must culturally think about within your workspaces. As you walk through your workspaces, and I'll give you a prime example of that. I work with a Fortune 500 company, and in this Fortune 500 company, I was at their headquarters. They gave me a tour of the place. It was really great. They talked about the artwork. They talked about, what they're doing. They gave me this great presentation on what they're doing around DEI. And I paused at the end and I said, I walked through your office. I only seen 2 people of color. I walked through your office. None of your artwork was reflective of myself or other cultures. Everything that was food in your cafeteria that you tried to offer me was not inclusive as well. And then you never thought to ask me my dietary needs or different things from that perspective. So I use that as an example of to say that even in your workspaces, whether you're doing remote, whether you're back in the office space, how inclusive it is of artwork. I laugh because right after that, I made those comments with that company, there was more, they went out and bought African-American artwork and actually started employing African-American artists because they have headquarters or different locations around the country to be inclusive of that, right? So then I started asking the question of, where's your supplier diversity? Because we all have supplier diversity needs. There's a national association called the Minority Supplier Diversity Council. How are you using that within your business model? Or if you're looking for minority women business owned opportunity, where are you using that? I'll give you a prime example. We talk about tech in this area. There's a large number of African-American women, Black women, that have tech startups in this area alone. How connected are you to them that you guys can have some cohesive collaborations and ability to work together? Inequity regimes. It's important for you to understand that inequity regimes are something that exists in a lot of cultures and organizations because they're homogenous. What are inequity regimes? Well, Joan Acker describes them as invisible systems and structures compromising practices, beliefs, and values that reward the way of being that exists. So again, if you have a homogenous organization, office, or culture, then guess what? You have already created an inequity regime that somebody like me, somebody that looks like me, will come into and not feel like they belong or participate in changing that homogenous culture. It's ideally rooted in whiteness, ability, maleness, straightness, middle age, and other dynamics. So when I say that, it doesn't include LGBTQ, doesn't include women, doesn't include all, young, older, all the other great stuff. So those are the things when equity regimes exist within an organization. Smoke and mirrors. So what I've seen, since I do work at University of Career Services on campus as well, is that everybody wants to come and hire us folks now at UNC and across different areas. But it could be smoke and mirrors. Do not just walk in the door and say, hey, Tierney, because I'm getting this now, we want to hire more Black students from UNC. What can we do? How can we market to them? And I push back and say, what is the culture they're walking into before I put you the best and brightest that I have in front of you? Because I can put the best and brightest in front of you because that's what we have at UNC. But that doesn't mean they will walk into a culture that's very inclusive, that has defined diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging, that will be very homogenous, and it will be a struggle for them to adapt versus you creating the environment where they don't have to adapt, but they're welcome and that all their authentic self is brought to the table. Because that's what we're going to see from companies and corporations over the next few months or the next year is going this huge hiring of Black people and Indigenous and people of color, but not truly look internal from that perspective. One of the things we're doing here in UNC is looking at a diversity, equity, inclusion scorecard to give to our organizations, to give to our employers, to make sure that they meet a certain criteria if they want to recruit our students of color. I also want you to understand that you need to practice inclusion with exclusion in the name of equity. So just like any practice, anything that you would tackle within your business or within your organization, this is the same thing you need to do around inclusion. It can't stop. It has to be ongoing. Even though we have this great dialogue today, I would challenge Launch Chapel Hill and the Enterprise Center to keep the dialogue going at least on a quarterly basis, because new things will arrive, new things will come up, and there's new opportunities to keep the dialogue moving forward to make sure organizations and make sure people are truly looking at being inclusive and feeling belonging is at the forefront of everything. You need to take your hiring managers and put them through some cultural competency training. You need to develop them to be able to understand the nuances when it comes to recruiting people of color, particularly. I'm tired of hearing that I can't find X, Y, and Z. No point ever in history has there been more educated Black, Indigenous people of color than this today. They are all around you. I would ask is, where are you looking for them at? Just putting out a job on Indeed, just putting out a job in higheredjobs.com would not attract the best and brightest. You have to know individuals. You have to be part of ERG groups. You have to be part of professional associations. You have to be part of the Divine Nine, and I know I have some Divine Nine on the call today. You have to broaden your perspective on who and where you recruit at. I'll take my fraternity, for example. At our national conferences, we bring employees to us. If they want to attract Black males, if you're PricewaterhouseCoopers, you want to come be at the Sigma conference. You're going to find a ton of accountants, Black males, and you're going to address that. But then on the flip side, we're going to ask you, how diverse is your true workforce? How diverse is your culture? How is it still homogenous? Is the organizational still homogenous moving forward? One of the things we have to also address is looking at leadership. I do this consistently when an organization wants to come and recruit and starts talking about, we want to recruit students of color. I always ask them, how many people are in leadership of color? Not just one, because that's what we normally get, is we have the one person. I want to see multiple. Who's on your board of directors? We've seen that we need more people of color on our board of directors. We need more women on our board of directors. That is truly how you shift cultural change within an organization and within an office. Who is in senior leadership roles? Most of the time, we're not seeing people of color in leadership roles. But yet, I just explained to you, the talent is all around you. I can name 10 people right now that I can put on people's boards, that I can put in jobs right now that are phenomenal individuals. But it's a matter of, do you know them? Have you spoken with them? Or they don't have the right connections. So it's important for us to understand that, and it's important for us to move forward on a lot of that as we move forward, to make sure that you shift and change your organization from there. And I want you to understand that to be able to do that, you have to have these dialogues internally. So now I'm going to give you 10 tips. 10 tips to create an inclusive workplace model. Tip number 1, you need to build out an inclusive workplace model. That is, do employees feel like they can have to hide or mask themselves when they come to work? Or can they be heard? Can they feel like they belong? Or do they feel invisible? You have to look at that. So for a lot of Black employees, and I'll use UNC as a prime example, even though I work here, is that there's some things that there's a disconnect for Black employees with leadership within department units and also at the senior level as well, of how they truly feel. What should you do? You should build out some kind of focus group or a true climate survey within your organization to address what those things rise to the top. If I look at UNC, we have a large number of SHRA employees, or people, I would say, at the administrative level, coordinator level. But when we look at senior leadership, it needs to grow. It really needs to grow, even in the middle management realm as well. When I also look at it is, how are you strategizing around that to make sure it moves forward as an organization and holding people accountable? I tell people all the time, if there was a client that you lost and it was one of your salespeople that lost that client, you would hold them accountable. And guess what? You as CEO, you as the executive director and leader, you need to hold yourself accountable too for this same thing around diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging. Number 2, do executive leaders and leadership team reflect or portray the demographics of your state, your community, and your institution? I'll give you a prime example. We're 25% almost of Black people in North Carolina, but at UNC, we're at 8% student. We should mirror it. It should be at least 20% students of color or Black students, I would say, here at UNC. So we should mirror that if we're truly trying to get past and get into this equitable state. Number 3, we need to acknowledge religious and cultural practices, as I gave you example, Juneteenth, or being able to have prayer within our organization or time off for Rosh Hashanah, for Ramadan, whatever it may be from that point moving forward. 4, you need to foster a culture that every voice is heard, welcomed, and respected. That's why I foster in my organization, and how we treat each other is very important. I always say how you treat the lowest person on your staff is a reflection of how you should treat the CEO. So if you treat the CEO as, you know, the God Almighty, you should treat your janitor, your administrative assistant as the way. So how we treat our lowest employees is very important because it will speak to your organization. Number 5, you need to build a multi-generational workforce. As we know, millennials and Generation Z are the workforce coming in. And as I stated before, they are the people who will replace the baby boomers, the silent Gen, and Gen Xers. We need to make sure all those are in the workspace because it's an opportunity for us to role model. It's the opportunity for us to learn from each other, but it's also an opportunity for our Gen Z to teach us certain things. How many of you had to have a Gen Zer teach you how to use Zoom? I know I had to teach people in my own team in different parts of the university and different things, how to get on this platform and use and navigate it moving forward as far as that's concerned. That's the beauty of having a multi-generational workforce, but making sure that everyone is represented in your house. Number 6, you need to foster inclusive and diverse thinking. That means when you go on a project, you're working with the client, talk to them about inclusivity and diversity and foster that within your organization for your staff, your team can develop that mind frame. Number 7, reflect everyone's needs and preferences, as I already stated, at gatherings. I don't do potlucks. I tell people, this is the reason why I tell people I don't do potlucks. Don't know where you cook your food from, don't know how clean you are. So it's important for you to understand that. And so again, put that out there, put that in the atmosphere as you engage about coming together in groups within your organization. Number 8, look at all your policies, which I'll talk about in the next bullet point, that can lead to superficial and discriminatory practices. Number 9, your workspace. I keep saying this. I'm the first thing I look at when I walk into an office space or somebody's office is inclusivity. What do they have on their walls? What do they have speaking to certain things? I'll give you Keenan Flagler is a prime example. Keenan Flagler should have the first Black graduate up in the school. They should have some entrepreneurs like a Doug Spade, who's a good friend of mine, up in there. I say that because that speaks volumes to me as a Black man when I walk in a space and I see Keenan and Flagler, and then I see a Doug Spade. It speaks volumes to me that I am welcome in this place and in this space, and that I can see myself one day being a Doug Spade who started multiple startups. It's important for us to think like that. And last but not least, number 10, you need to personalize your discussions with your staff. I say that because leaders, and I say leaders, not managers or bosses, leaders will learn their staff. They will take time to truly understand what works for an individual, what are their strengths. We don't worry about weaknesses. Let's focus on their strengths, prioritize certain things for them to be successful, because a lot of time we lose Black, Indigenous people of color because we've not taken the time to personalize our conversations in our one-on-ones, during our performance evaluations, to truly talk about the work, how well is it going, what are the things we need to prioritize, what things need to fall back, play to your strengths, put a person in a mode to be successful, and again, any onboarding process that you have to make them be successful. Anybody takes a new job, it takes a year before you truly get your footing on the ground. Yes, you can hit the ground running fast and doing certain things, but are we doing busy work? Or are we doing stuff that, again, I'll go back to, that is strategic around objectives, strategies, goals, and measurements moving forward? Policies improvement, documentation, evaluations is very important. Every organization, every business should look at their policies, look at their documentation, look at their evaluation, and leverage it. Leverage it as a strategic advantage and thread it through your organization in training and evaluations. It's important for you to understand that some of your policies block Black, Indigenous people of color from coming to work for you. Some of your way you document things blocks Black, Indigenous people of color come to work for you. They also are saying things that will help them leave your organization. And so it's important for you to use equity-inspired design think to address some of these barriers. It's important for you to understand that the training and evaluations you do within your organization must be reflective of everybody, but you must include and be available to have true dialogue and conversation moving forward. And a prime example of that is developing simulated work and training with employers to recruit. So as you send people out to recruit, what are you doing to simulate work or do training within your own internal organization to address bias, to address racial issues, you can actually do this as a simulation. Now, it ain't gonna be fun. Sometimes people get tired of this, and I get it. That's why I'm giving you suggestions in the next slide. It is one of those things that will make you a better organization for the simple fact that if you practice this, if you do simulated work, you do simulated training, it will speak not only to your people of color working for you, it will speak to your white colleagues that this matters and that we as an organization will become what we say we want to become. We also realize that when it comes to diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging, teams that are really DEIB produce more, work better, and hit your bottom line better. So here's some resources. And I know that Velvet and Keisha will send out some resources as well. I want to pause because we're going to go into obviously questions because there's a lot of things I can share with you today on multiple different things. But here's some people that I want you to check out. They'll send you the research on community cultural wealth. Here's 5 crucial diversity and inclusion lessons we need to learn from. The best person you guys could bring in at Launch Chapel Hill or the Enterprise Entrepreneurship Center, Kia Jarman. Kia Jarman is a Black female who owns her own business as an entrepreneur, who also does this work that I'm doing. And it's amazing because she can speak to you from the entrepreneurship side. She can speak to you from a communication strategic side, because that's what she focuses on, and your training and internal things that you need to do for your team and staff. And me and her collaborate. She's actually part of my group, the Bates Group LLC as well, since we do a lot of collaborations together and work alongside each other. Velvet has some articles and some things I've already dropped in the chat to send to you. Locally, we have the Racial Equity Institute. If you get an opportunity to go to that training, I would recommend that you go to that training. You can look at them up their website and try to attend that or bring them into your organization. Another thing is, like we're doing in University Career Services, create a diversity, equity, inclusion scorecard for your organization. So what does that look like? Call me, email me. We can work with you on that because it's important for you to understand that it's not one thing just to say we have numbers, but it's another thing to shift the culture, shift everything to make sure that you're inclusive. And that language, fit, numbers, all that stuff will matter. And that it's their accountability piece on the other end of if this doesn't happen, what does happen for most folks. Here's some books. If you haven't read White Fragility, I recommend that. The Color of Law is a great book that everybody should read, I tell people, for the simple fact it speaks to our issues around law and how law played a huge practice in segregation and in keeping Black people in this country down. American Rules, a new book coming out by James J. Sexton that talks about the statutes that everybody's running around, pissed off about from that perspective. He gives you detailed facts and figures in this book of why the statutes are not important, why the statutes came about, if you understand when statutes were first placed out. I know we've had the issue here with Silent Sam, and then gives you a knowledge a bit about certain things from 1865 to present day. Black Faces and White Spaces with Randall Pinkett, who's a friend of mine, great guy. Me and him talk all the time. Good is Not Enough, another great one. Here's a local book, Black Man in a White Coat by Damon Tweedy, who's actually a local Duke doctor. And How to Be Anti-Racist by Ibram Kendi is another book as well. All these resources will be sent out to you guys. I'm excited to really talk to you. And I know I'm at time because I want to be able to answer questions. And I know I probably talk fast, all that other great stuff, but hopefully you took some notes down and we can get into the dialogue.
Fantastic. Thank you, Dr. Bates. So we will open it up for questions now. I know one of the questions was, can you send out that top 10 list? And we'll follow up with you and get that.
I'll send it to you.
Any questions? Please feel free to type it in the chat box or unmute yourself.
I just want to give a shout out to my frat brother on the call today too.
Awesome.
Hi, my name's Tyrell Carter. I'm a part of Launch Chapel Hill right now, and I'm working on my own startup. And as a startup founder, how can I work on these things and try to make sure that my business is equitable and as inclusive as possible while still being an owner of a startup and bootstrapping everything that I have to do?
So obviously you're bootstrapping everything you need to do. Let's just start with what is your platform, your startup?
We develop software for small businesses in order to help them run as efficiently as possible.
So you have marketing, right? So you need to look at your marketing. You need to look at your supply diversity opportunities. Since you are what I call a minority business owned, MBE. So what are you doing with those other small businesses that have conversation around how you're developing an ecosystem for business owners like yourself that is small, minority-owned startup as well. I think also it's probably just you, so you haven't started probably adding staff or anything like that, right?
Yeah, that's right. Just me.
So
Right
just think about that when you start blowing up, as I like to say. And how do you make sure that the talents you bring on basically, personifies what you believe in? Also, look at what is your mission, vision, and statement around DEI as your business is growing. So how do you develop that overall? And so I think it's important for you to start there at the base level of your own mission, vision, what you're doing work-wise around marketing, finance, who you're working with, and kind of building a baseline of, as a startup business that are working with these companies, DEI is important to us for X, Y, and Z. Diversity is important because of this, equity is important for this, inclusion is important for us for this. And we want to make sure that we are at the table to help your organization understand it as well. Because even as you are working with these maybe bigger clients or smaller clients, you're helping them look at gaps they may have.
That's great. Thank you so much.
Dr. Bates, we have a question that came to me. Do you have an opinion, or if you've heard of the podcast Scene on Radio, SCENE? Season 2 specifically has been recommended as good starting point for white people.
I have not heard that one. So thank you for sharing that. If they can put it in the chat and we can share with others, that is real good. I think the biggest thing that people have to understand is that in our country, we're built in the United States on individualism. And I think that is where we're seeing this divide from a political standpoint as well, but also just this divide about individualism. If you look at cultural, that's why I say it's important to learn and talk to your Black, Indigenous people of color. From a cultural standpoint, Black people believe in collectivism because we've had to survive and navigate society around collectivism in the United States of America. So when people say the issue around the mask that we're seeing, I thought I lived in a free country. Yes, but you impact my health. You know what I'm saying? You impact my health, even from all my public health people that might be on the call. You all understand how that impacts us all. We've had these pandemics and we realize we need to learn from them. And for us to be selfish to say, I can't wear a mask is really one of those things that speaks to right fragility, but also speaks to privilege. Because for most people didn't realize this, if I wear a mask, and I know I'm at UNC right now in a nice polo and everything like that, but I go running in the morning. As I tell people, and if I have a mask on and I'm just running around, I can be stopped by the police and say, why am I running in this beautiful neighborhood? People don't have to understand that that is culturally what's happened for years. And I think George Floyd showed us this, but if you go back to Emmett Till and prior to Emmett Till, it's happened in our country. It's just George Floyd. What's different nowadays is what TV was for the civil rights movement was, social media is for today's Black Lives Matter movement. Other questions?
I just wanted to make a comment if that was okay. So my name is Jordan. I work in the Office of Student Conduct at UNC Chapel Hill, so I'm in student affairs as well. And as a woman who is a woman of color, I'm Hispanic or Latina, however you would like to put it. But I pass as white, and my partner is a Black man who is a Black man, looks like a Black man. He doesn't have the same experiences that a lot of other Black men in our country have had. And me as a passing white woman, I have not, I've seen a lot of sexism throughout my life, but not so much racism towards me because I pass as white. And so it's really interesting, and I really like that you touched on personalizing the conversation and talking with people, because I think it's very important to realize not everyone has these same experiences. I feel like my boyfriend or people have talked to me about my boyfriend's experience, and I'm like, he doesn't have the same experience that a lot of people have in this country. And so I thank you for touching on that personalization of the conversation with people, especially in the workforce.
No, I think it's very important as personalizing the conversation. One of the biggest things I've learned in my career is that until you get to know people you work with, and I'll say this from my own personal experience, I'm hesitant to truly be my authentic self sometimes when I show up to work, especially in white spaces, for the simple fact of the things that have been perceived, the things that have been marketed, the things that are shown on TV, what Black men look like. So just like your fiance, he's your fiance, right?
He's my boyfriend, but
we gonna call him
fiance.
We're gonna claim that fiance. We're gonna claim the fiance. Your future fiance.
Yeah.
Not all Black people are monolithic. We don't all have the same experiences. This is very true. But I would say that 9 times out of 10, depending upon where you were raised, depending upon what circles you ran in, there are certain things that you don't really realize. I tell people, I didn't learn I was Black until I was 13 years old. I grew up, we were the first Black family on my street. I grew up in a well-to-do neighborhood. My best friend was white. I didn't realize I was Black until his dad sat down to me as we were getting older. And he said to Andy, Andy, do you guys know, this, you guys are great friends, everything like that, but you might face some adversity growing up as you guys get older. And I'm like, what is he talking about? We're 13. We're not even thinking about that. We want to go outside and play football. And he said, well, Tierney's Black. You're Polish, Irish, and even though you guys are buddies right now, based upon his skin tone, there will be certain things that we will face. He will be discriminated against just because of that. And again, we're 13, flying over our heads and everything like that. But his dad, who was a white male at the time, kept honing this to both of us at 13 years old. And it was when I transferred into St. Ignatius High School, which was the high school where I'm from in Cleveland, Ohio, that I really saw what he was talking about. They brought me in as one of 15 freshmen of Black males, and there were only 30 in the whole school. And I just told you it was 15 of us, so it was only 15 prior to weekend. And the discrimination I faced that freshman year in high school, I never had faced ever before. But his dad had prepared me for that. Again, up until that point, oblivious. And again, certain scenarios, certain situations dictate. That's why Jordan, that's why that personalization and that conversation is important, because you don't know what that person's went through.
Yeah, thank you for touching on that. I just really appreciate it. And I think it's something that white people are afraid to ask about. Like, what is your experience? How have you experienced racism in the past, or sexism, or anything that revolves around not being a marginalized group? So I just appreciate you touching on that and making part of the conversation, because I think it's something we're afraid to talk about.
Yeah, I mean, for all the business owners on here today, if you employ Black, Indigenous people of color, personalize the conversation. I bet you $5 if they feel you truly care and that you truly personalize that conversation, they will open up so much that will improve not only the business, but it will improve the environment and the culture of the office.
Dr. Bates, I have a question for you. What advice do you have for organizations to create that space for Black people to have these uncomfortable conversations? Because a lot of times there could be fear of reprisal from the Black professional, or they're thinking, okay, if I do speak up on this issue, what does this mean for my career advancement, my career in general? So what can organizations do to create that space to where you as a Black person can speak on those issues that you see? As you stated earlier, we see a lot of things, but oftentimes we're a little hesitant to speak on it. So what do you have, what do you advise on that?
So, the biggest thing is, I would say your leadership, your leaders need to be able to create an environment that where people don't feel invisible and they feel like they can be heard. You can do two different things. First, you can do a climate survey, like I said before. You could actually just say, I want to target my Black, Indigenous people of color. I'm gonna send it out to my staff, get that information. It's anonymous, they fill it out, and tell them go to town on it. Because you'll see some things. Some things are gonna hurt you. I tell organizations, when you get a true climate survey, you're gonna think like everything was great, everything was candy. No, it's not. And so you're gonna learn some things, and from learning that, you will ask them, how are the solutions? Because they'll become part of the solution. You could ask them, what is the climate? And then say, what are some solutions? And what you really realize is that you're putting the onus, which is also kind of horrible sometimes, is putting the onus back on them, but at the same time, they can share with you how to become a better organization. The second piece is the focus groups, and hiring an external reviewer to come in and say, hey, I'm going to lead focus group with the employers in different aspects. So I'll lead it with the senior leadership, middle level, entry level leadership, and actually gather that information, and they come back with a presentation of saying, here's your gaps within your organization that your Black, Indigenous people of color are saying versus what leadership is saying versus what you're portraying as far as diversity, equity, inclusion, your practices. Roderick, you know about the DEI scorecard. These are the different things that you need to do as an organization to truly move forward as far as that is concerned. So I would say climate survey and an external reviewer for your from a focus group standpoint to help move that. Because again, what you have, I mean, we have it here at UNC. and I'm just very transparent, is that you have individuals who want to say something, but fear of retaliation, fear of losing their job, knowing that we're in this situation we're in right now means everything. But at the end of the day, as a leader, as I always say, I'm a leader, I am listening to my people because it's going to make me better as a leader and make us better as an organization. And if they tell me, you know, Tierney, the sky is blue and I'm over here yelling it's red and we know it's blue, I need to actually get on the same page to help move our organization forward and pay attention to them. Because what we see is a revolving door. The reason why most organizations can't retain good talent of color is because they're not doing what Roderick just mentioned. They're not taking the time to personalize it, like Jordan said, and they're not taking the time to listen because we're caught up in, I got to meet these metrics. We're caught up in, I got to do X, Y, and Z. And I get it. We're running businesses. You have to do that. But your business can run so much better if you take that time.
So we have what? I'm sorry. I think there was there's one more question. So I'm going to ask this question, and then I'll let that person go, whoever it was.
Sure.
How do you balance personalizing the conversation with not putting the onus on Black, Indigenous, people of color employees / individuals to teach white employees / individuals?
So one of the biggest things is, you know, when you go in, here, I'll give you a prime example. I created a sheet that I gave to my staff that asked how many family members you got, you know, are you married, not married, do you have a dog, you know, what's your favorite candy, favorite potato chip, favorite restaurant, you know, all this other stuff. I asked those kind of questions because those are icebreakers to get into the personal stuff. You know, if I know, you know, say that Jordan loves Twizzlers and I bring her Twizzlers, you know, once every 2 weeks, that breaks down a barrier for Jordan to say, oh, you got me some Twizzlers, you know I love Twizzlers. And he brought me another bag of Twizzlers, and then my next one-on-one with her, I'm like, so how were the Twizzlers? They're really good. So, you know, based upon the sheet that I gave you to fill out, how's your husband or your future fiance from that perspective? And she could say, oh, things are going well, da, 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 da. What do you need? And when I ask that question, I'm saying, not only on a personal level, but professional level, what do you need, me as your leader, to help you be successful on a personal and professional level?
Great. And then one last question. I wasn't sure who spoke, but I did hear someone.
Hey, Dr. Bates. I'm Evan Lancero, an incoming graduate student. I had a question for you. What are your, can you describe your views on affinity groups and how you can comfortably introduce affinity groups into your organization?
Love affinity groups, ERG groups, whatever name they go by. I think it's very important for organizations to do that. So what you've seen is, and here's the newest one, we need to have one for women, right? Because what we've had is one for Black, one for Latinx, one for LGBTQ, but we need to also have one for women, but also for Generation Z, right? So Generation Z is showing up at your doors to work, but they're coming with a different work style and mentality. They do not want to work like we do, 9 to 5, sun up to sundown, in some cases from that perspective. They want to work-life balance. And so we need to understand that creating that Gen Z, because Gen Z will help you recruit the next future leaders. And well, I don't know what the generation is after Gen Z, because it starts at 2010, but they'll be able to talk to and speak to those individuals moving forward. I think they're added value to any organization. And if you don't have them, you need to have them. But also don't just have them, give them some time, give them some talent, and give them some treasure. When I say that, help them help themselves and help them help your organization by investing in them, meaning helping them put on events, helping them attract talent for you, giving them money to do some things to support outside things. Prime example is if we took P&G, for example, they had one for Latinx and they went out and said, we're going to work with the Hispanic Chamber of Commerce and we want to support a networking event for not only our Latinx employees, but also the local University of Cincinnati students as well. Let them do that.
Great. Dr. Bates, thank you so very much. We have questions pouring in now, but it is it is 1 o'clock, so I want to be respectful of everyone's time. We did include Dr. Bates's contact information and LinkedIn profile at the beginning of the conversation. We'll also email it out here after this session so you can get in touch with him. But thank you so much for having this conversation with us and starting this conversation at launch. It's something we are excited and energized about, and I so appreciate it. And I would be remiss if I didn't thank Keisha with the Entrepreneurship Center, the marketing team with the Entrepreneurship Center, and our intern Shadi for doing all of the heavy lift to get the message out there that we were doing this session, and for having such an amazing turnout. Thank you all so much for all of your work. And thank you again for attending, and please be on the lookout for an email here in the next day or so with follow-up information. Thanks all.
Thank you.